My teachers hated my guts. Like, this is the 80s. Like, there's no, like, kindness. She would say things to me like, I don't know how you got in here, but I'm going to make sure you don't finish.
I'm chatting today with my friend Jamar Nicholas. Jamar is an absolutely brilliant graphic novelist. You might know Jamar from his Leon graphic novels put out by Scholastic Graphics. Jamar has been in the comics game for several years and he has so much wisdom to share. Before I get into my chat with Jamar, I am taking questions from listeners. I'd love to help you with your own origin story. If you would like to ask a question about anything book related, art related, career related, head to studiojjk.com/podcasts. That's podcasts plural. You can upload your question and perhaps I will answer it on a future episode. Also, if you would like to support the show, please visit studiojjk.com/shop. You can order a signed book or a t-shirt or sticker or a piece of artwork. Okay, on to Jamar Nicholas's origin story.
Origin stories with JJK.
Jarrett
Krasoska.
Jamar Nicholas, I'm so happy to have you here. You are always such a joy to talk to. But, in our comings and goings, I've never asked you what your childhood was like. What was your world like when you were a kid? What was your reality? What were you surrounded by?
That's a great question, Jarrett. My childhood was very urban. I'll say it like that. So I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Actually from West Philly. I hate to do the Will Smith jokes, but I'm from West Philly and
both born and raised.
Born and raised, yeah. Where I'm an only child, so that's also a big part of this. I'm an only child who is very close to. I have two boy cousins who one is a little older than me and one's the exact same age as me. So they were kind of like my brothers. So I spent a lot of time just kind of home or sitting out on the front steps drawing.
On paper with chalk or?
Just paper. My mother, who had a job at Pennsylvania Hospital, I think she was like a clerk or something. And Pennsylvania Hospital was famous. It was in Rocky 1 when they brought Rocky in. And she also tells me a story when they were filming there and like, yeah, this little white dude kept coming in and bossing people around. Like that was Sylvester Stallone would bring me paper from the hospital and give it to me. And I would like just be very excited to draw on it. But I was very much living in like underfoot of a bunch of 70s people, right? So since I was only child, it was my mother and I, kind of like a single family household who my mother had a couple of siblings. She had two brothers and a sister who were always back and forth at the house. And my one uncle, who was a firefighter, he was kind of like, he was like a 70s dude. There was lots of laughing and disco music and like boom, out. There was always music and a lot of people around. Nobody had real names, right? So like my uncle, all his buddies were there. Just if you watch Sanford and Son or like one of those shows, like here comes my boy Rollo and Smitty and Junior and Clyde and all these dudes were always like up around me. So I kind of developed an old soul really fast. So, and I think that kind of happens with only children who are surrounded by adults. You kind of grow up quicker and you try to like communicate like an adult when you're a kid and they find that amusing.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, I would just sit in the corner and crack jokes and try to make these people not chase me away so I could listen to Red Fox records after my bedtime. So I kind of grew up in a space with a lot of love, a lot of music, a lot of noise. And a lot of commotion. There was always something going on or somebody's coming in and out of the house, which kind of in a weird way, I don't want to say kind of developed my creativity, but I do really distinctly remembering the colors and the sounds and also finding quiet time. I think the kind of like the corollary of that is I wanted to find a space where I could just sit and draw and not have to get stepped on. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it. And there's also a part where I developed a love for comic strips. I didn't start off being a comic book fan. I didn't really understand comic books, but my family would get the Sunday paper and I would read the funny pages. I have a really odd love for Doonesbury.
Even as a kid, you like the Doonesbury?
I told you I was a weirdo.
Yeah, but
right?
Did you understand the politics of it?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. But I like the way Trudeau just kind of like handled his universe, and he would like sneak things into the panels. It would be Mike Doonesbury talking to somebody at a radio station, and there'd just be a picture of Nixon on the wall in the background. And by the fourth panel, it was like, I don't know, like Ford. Like it just changed.
Okay.
Just like you could do that. I was just kind of. It was almost like
Yeah.
I was intrigued by how he was just telling these stories. I didn't understand anything I was reading, and that was kind of like the beginning of my love of wanting my thoughts about being a cartoonist, and loving comic books came later. But I loved Doonesbury. I loved Bloom County, which is a little later. Andy Cap, which
You are an old soul. You were an old soul. You are an old
yeah,
soul, but you were an old soul. Because
yeah.
those were all like quote unquote comics that were for the grown-ups.
It was like loving Granny Candy as a kid.
Yeah, you loved you were just sitting there drawing, popping in some butterscotch candies, reading your Dewsbury.
Yeah, rock candy is delicious, and yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my thing. And later on, I love comics, but I always had weird tastes in things, and people have told me that I wanted to be old when I was young my whole life. So yay, we made it.
You
I'm
made
actually
it.
old. Yeah.
What was your mom's name?
Eula.
What did your mom Eula first see in you, do you suppose, that made her know that she needed to keep stacks of paper in front of you?
I think I really plugged into my imagination. And I think, as you have kids, I wonder if there's a part where you're like, well, he's very active. And then it's like, should I be concerned? Like, I think there's like a line somewhere there that you're just hoping it doesn't start to tilt too much on either side. But I think she's trying to keep up with me. If I would like burn through stuff, and then if there was no more paper, I started looking at the wall. I'm just
Okay.
kind of like, yeah, okay, I got some markers. No, 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 no,
Look
no.
at this
Here,
me.
here, use this. And yes, but also she was a creative. Later on, she kind of hopped around in careers as I got older. But at one point, she went back to school, and she went to Art Institute of Philly, and
Wow.
she was taking classes in what they now call graphic design, I guess. She was in commercial art. So halfway, like when I was a tween, like we were always going downtown to the art supply store. She had a studio in the house with like the slanted drafting table and all the really kind of weird art supplies and stuff like that. And that kind of connected me in a different way to like not just drawing, but like, yo, people do this for real, or they do this as a job. And that was really interesting to me as well.
So
So I think from her, I got maybe a professionalism, if that makes sense.
So your mom was, finally pursuing her artistic dreams when you were of the age where one thinks about what their dreams might be as they propel into adolescence. So it's almost like you were both going through that at the same time in some way. And I'm sure she was just as inspired by you as you were inspired by her, because I know I'm always inspired by my kids. That takes a lot of courage to be a single mom who's then going to go back to school for the arts, especially. At what point in your maturation did you know for sure, like, this is, mom, this is what I want to do with my life as well?
I think everything really came into focus when this is interesting because I told you about my cousins, right? So one of like the one brother is 4 years older and the other one's my age, and I will kind of like bounce off of my same age cousin a lot. So we're almost like kind of like playmates too. And I watched him kind of discover things, get really into them, and then put them down. And I don't think he ever knew that I was like kind of studying him, because you know what I mean. He was the first person I knew, because he had like money, like he had a job with his dad, and they would go like rewire houses and stuff. He had like Marvel Comics subscriptions, and I'd come over and he had these like stacks of like brown paper mailers. And I'm like, yo, what's that? Oh, this is a new Alpha Flight and this is Avengers. I was like, wait, you can get comics mailed to you? You know what I mean? Like I was always discovering stuff with him, and he got really into that, and then he stopped. And then he started drawing. Like he got a little sketchbook and he would kind of do stuff, and then he would stop. And I would always bother him about his sketchbook. I'm like, yo, did you draw anything? Nah, I didn't draw anything. I was like, well, I'm drawing. Nah, no, no, no. So, I was always kind of watching him kind of stop and start. But I felt like the art thing was mine. You know what I mean? Like felt like everything else people could take from me, but this was mine to have. So it was probably when I was about to go into high school, which seems like a far distance from this story, where I really wanted to go to the Creative and Performing Arts High School here in Philly. And that's a giant part of my lore now. So this is like 85, 86. And my mother, who now has kind of watched me wanting to go to an art magnet school in Philly, gave me this almost like the talk, but it wasn't the talk. It wasn't a birds and bees talk. It was like an art talk. And she was like, boy, if you want to do this for real, you have to take it seriously because you're taking somebody else's spot. If you're going to go there and like screw it up, So, kind of growing up and watching her have clients and all this other kind of stuff, like I knew how to have a presentation case to put my work in for my audition, and I knew all these kind of like hacks. It was like cheat codes to how to like be a professional. And she's like, you have all the stuff, your work isn't clean. Like I always had thumbprints and Kool-Aid stains on everything, and she's like, you got to take this seriously. So after I went through this gauntlet and got into the school, like I needed to protect the cartooning. And I think that's when everything kind of took off. So at this point, and just for people's frame of reference, Kappa, as they call it here in school, was like the fame school, like from the TV show and the movie. That was in New York. This was the Philadelphia version. And it had this kind of like very misty reputation. It's just like, oh wow, not everybody can go to Kappa. Like you have to be like really good to go to, and was talked about in high regard. And for some reason, I just thought, well, of course I should go there because I want to be a cartoonist. And I realized that a lot of the other kids did not know how to present their work because who was going to tell them?
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And even at that point, there weren't a lot of really strong art programs in like middle school and junior high. So, I saw kids kind of like showing up at their audition with their work in a backpack and they just like unrolled it and like,
Yeah.
like loose leaf paper crumpled up. And I was just like, you can't do that. That's not how you do it. So I kind of just, I kind of had a little bit of a leg up because I saw my mother and how she presented herself and her work. And I almost felt like that was like half the battle. You know what I mean? Because your presentation is everything, image is everything. And I felt like that, and my work was okay, but I felt like, I had the right formula to maybe wow these people, or at least they saw some good in me. So I got into the school. And this is where it gets interesting, Jarrett. As I said this to Raina, and I kind of blew her mind. So when I was at Performing Arts High School, it was this golden age where all of these famous kids wound up going to Kappa at the same time. So like I went to school with Boys to Men.
All four of them?
Well, there were 5 of them that were.
Oh, now they're down to 3.
Yeah. I went to school with the Roots. I went to school with like a bunch of actors and like famous musicians, and but we're just dusty kids at the time. But one of the things that was really poignant about that is that everybody came from these little pods where they had to practice for like 70 hours a week. Well, like if you want to be Questlove, you got to be drumming like all the time. And all the kids had these crazy work ethics, and then you had these stellar instructors, and those things just kind of lined up. Like you'd walk down the hall, you'd walk past one of the music rooms, and they're like doing scales, and it's like 8:30 in the morning. So kind of like all of that is kind of culminated in these kids being really top flight creatives, and it all just kind of like started with, I think, the background there. So that was kind of where I knew I really needed to take it seriously. But here's the funny thing for you, Jarrett. My teachers hated my gut.
Because you were a cartoonist?
Because I was a cartoonist.
Yeah. There's so much prejudice against cartoonists in the fine art world.
They were like, nope. I had a couple of teachers, my drawing teacher, who was like actively trying to get me kicked out of school. Like she hated me. And I was a little bit of a social butterfly. I wasn't a troublemaker. You know what I'm saying?
I can't imagine.
Me? Parents would thought.
Social butterfly, yes. Troublemaker, no.
And she was just like, I don't know how you got in. Like, this is the 80s. Like there's no like kindness.
Yeah.
Like your teachers were almost like not drill sergeants, they were like against you.
Yeah.
Like if you can make it through this gauntlet, I'll let you pass. They're like with the batons. So she would say things to me like, I don't know how you got in here, but I'm going to make sure you don't finish. Or like, you know, drawing this like ghetto art. Oh, there's all kinds of stuff that's beyond just, well, just draw the bowl of fruit and let's move on. Like they were kind of like, like stepping on my neck. But I had one teacher who secretly, under the veil of darkness, would come and help me on with my cartooning when nobody was looking. So it would be like kind of in between classes, and I walk by his room, and he'd like, come here, close the door. And he'd pull out, like he'd take one of my drawings. Like I have like these really bad turnarounds, my character with his hands behind his back because I don't know how to draw hands.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, no, you got to draw with head, like this, your character should be 3 heads high. So you take the head and you stack it, and that's how and then, he was like showing me how it works. And then somebody would come in and he would like hide the paper and go to class. It was very weird. They hated me. And, it's not like I was this really poor student. It's just like I knew what I wanted to do. I was really excited to be there. I loved all of that. But the teachers didn't like me.
Wow.
Sorry for the long story. Long story.
I tangentially knew about Boys to Men.
Yeah, I might have told you that.
No,
yeah.
I didn't know the roots part. But
yeah.
That's wild. I mean, I remember after I graduated from art college, I didn't know exactly how I was going to make money, and so I applied to
money. We didn't talk about money at all.
I applied to teach at a private school outside of Boston, and they said, "Sorry, we're looking for a real artist."
Yeah, they pulled no punches, Jarrett. They just
I know. Yeah. I mean, and I know that definitely still persists in the art world, but certainly when we're coming up, if you were in a fine art space, forget it. But obviously you graduated from that school.
No, they kicked me out.
They did kick you out?
She succeeded. Yeah. Oh, and then you know what? And this is, I know I'm an adult now because this was a giant shame of mine for, like probably from my, during that time to like my 40s. I was so ashamed that I got kicked out of Kappa. And I got to the very end, like I finished my junior year. And then because it was like a magnet and because it was unregulated 80s, you could do what you wanted. The teachers, as I walked by the room and saw it one year, it wasn't my year, that all the art teachers got in somebody's room and they threw everybody's folders on the table. And they just had a tribunal. They were just like, yeah, no, put him over there. I don't know. And I, unbeknownst to me, I, finished my year. And then in the middle of the summer, my mother walks into the kitchen with a yellow envelope. And she goes,
was she so angry with you or with them?
Now, this is also, she's an 80s mom.
Yeah.
So she was not like, not my child. We're going downtown and she put her like little house coat on. No, she was like, I guess you're going to Germantown High.
Yeah.
There was like, whatever they said is final. Like, there's no appeal. Like, whatever you did wasn't good enough for them, or you pissed somebody off, or whatever the thing was. My heart dropped out of. Oh,
I can't imagine.
Just boom, right there. And it says, Jamar Nicholas was not invited back to Performing Arts High School. Please report to your neighborhood school for senior year.
I mean, on so many levels, like your senior year of high school, you're all building up to that. The feeling of rejection, you must have had the feeling, I don't know if you were applying for colleges, but that certainly would seem like a dark mark on your resume that you just kicked out of that school.
I mean, there's another thing. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there was a thing where I was just, I don't want to say lucky, but I kind of had one thing I wanted to do, and I just kind of like threw my grappling hook up at it, and something caught. So I started climbing. It was very rare that I threw my grappling hook and it fell back down.
It's usually just hit you on the head.
Yeah, clunk. Right. So like after that, I reported to my neighborhood school for my senior year, and it was scary. It was scary in the fact that I had been so like sheltered being at the school, because the way it was all structured was I had a lot of arts credits. I almost had little to no liberal arts credits.
It's like math?
Yeah, they stacked everything. I had like visual art, painting, design too, and I had like English.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't math 3 or Kim or anything. You know what I'm
It
saying?
was just arithmetic.
With a apostrophe R, arithmetic.
Yeah.
You got a B plus in you got a B plus in arithmetic, right? So I report to this, and no disrespect to my neighborhood high school at the time, but it was kind of like a zoo, right? It was kind of like if you ever saw Mean Girls, where you see the kids like in the Serengeti running down the hall with all fours. It's a little bit of that. I show up like, what's going on here? Like I almost got jumped the first day of school. It was wild. It was like being in jail. But I went to the counselor, and he was like, it was almost like the angel who fell from the heavens, and now you got to pay for it. Like, Kappa kid, huh?
Oh, too rich for our blood.
Yeah, no, they were like, okay, so you're missing 3 Englishes and 2 maths. There's no way you're going to graduate. It was like the second day of school. So like I was so behind from being like, if I stayed at Kappa, I would have graduated because I fulfilled their requirements.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the public school system, I was way behind.
So what happened?
I had to go to summer school, and I hadn't even started the last year, senior year yet. So I was already behind the second I got there. So that took me like a year and a half to finally graduate from school. Wow. So that was a really dark moment in my trajectory. It was a whole thing.
Well, I can't even imagine the mental turmoil you must have been in.
Yeah, and but then later on, like I finally got my act together and I applied to art school. So I went to the University of the Arts here in Philly. And again, there's a Philly thing. I wanted to go to SVA in New York, the School of Visual Arts, because they had a cartooning major.
Yeah.
But then this is kind of another deficiency of mine. We never talked about college.
Growing up.
Yeah, it's just, and I kind of come from the kind of family where they're like, boy, you better get good grades.
For what end?
Right. It was kind of like, don't get anybody pregnant. It was like that kind of platitude from the adults around me. Just like,
keep your nose clean.
Don't bring home no babies. I'm like,
yeah.
Okay. Right. So it was kind of like, I didn't know I could go to New York. I was a little bit of a 6-block radius kid. You know what I mean? I didn't, nobody was bringing home these brochures or those school visits. There were no, let's go on a tour of campus. I got a thing in the mail, and money didn't really have meaning. It was like, well, going to SVA will cost you like $40,000 a year. I'm like, I don't have $40,000. And that was the end of that. Yeah. So I somehow applied to University of the Arts, and I got in. And that was fantastic. A lot of my friends from there are still some of my best buddies. But even with that, I still want to be a cartoonist. They didn't have cartooning, Jarrett. You see?
Did they have illustration?
Well, see, this is interesting. In your freshman year, like your foundation your foundation year, you kind of just like dabble in a bunch of stuff. And I wanted to be a cartoonist, and I had a couple of friends who were kind of in the same boat with me. And a lot of them went into illustration, and then some people went into film. And I kept looking at animation, and I said, I don't want to be an animator. I never wanted to be an animator, but how lofty this is. But when they make a cartoon of my things, I want to direct.
Dude, we would have been best friends because that's exactly how I thought. I thought they'll just make something based on one of my books, and but can you just adjust the wrist a little bit in frame 4?
Yeah, I'm going to go through my dailies, right? That was my whole impetus. I didn't want to be a flipper. I didn't want to do that. But that was a very interesting goal I had for myself. And, I'll just fast forward this to say, like, I dropped out of college. I dropped out of art school. I have a coffee mug around here that kind of makes my wife upset, and it says art school dropout.
Hey, you and the Talking Heads.
Yeah, right. I was just like, you know what? Here I am. And I had this very awkward conversation with somebody on a plane. I got flown out to a library visit, and this woman was trying to chat me up next to me, and she was like, "You're an author. You're a horror." and so she was kind of like, "What did you go to school for? What did you graduate?" I was like, "I went to school for animation." Oh, so that taught you how? I was like, "No, I learned how to be a cartoonist in the streets."
Yeah.
I learned it behind the 7-Eleven. Nobody taught me how to be a cartoonist. You know what I mean? So I learned it in the woods like all the other cartoonists that I grew up liking. So it was a super long story.
No,
Long.
that's an engaging, intriguing story. I mean, that had so many twists and turns that I was not anticipating. How long did you last at
I was at University of the Arts for like 2.5 years.
University? 2.5 years. Oh, so that's a pretty significant. I
Yeah.
came really close to dropping out of art college as well.
Yeah. And what was the reason?
Do I need this? Can't I just draw the pictures and get it published on my own?
See, like I think that's a giant part of it. And the funny thing about all of that was I have two more stories about this is kind of, when I meet up with my old buddies from school and they're all very proud of me, Jarrett. And it kind of makes me a little misty because they say things to me like, regardless of all the things that happened to you in school, your like whole academic career and all these things, you still made it.
Hey,
And
I only interview people who made it. Look at you right here. You're just look at here. You got to be on Jarrett's podcast.
that's right.
I'm not talking to any schlub on the street to hear about their childhood.
That's right. Right. So
But
like,
yeah, that is misty worthy.
right. And it's just like, oh, you guys, come on, cut it out.
And
But
keep going. Keep it going.
keep going. But at the same time, it was just kind of like, well, I always knew what I wanted to do. I know that is rare.
Yes.
I know a lot of people who waffle. I know a lot of people who are just like, well, I'm waiting for permission. Or once I get this piece of paper, now I can be an artist. Or whatever thing they've told themselves that stops them from moving forward. I just knew what I wanted to do, wasn't being taught. And I had to just figure it out. So
Yeah.
I think you and I are a lot alike in that we kind of create our own magic.
For your own destiny.
You create your own destiny. Yeah.
I've always had the mantra that, talent sits on its ass, but initiative and motivation will take you places.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
exactly what you did.
Yeah. That's very real. And I defend that. And, when like the lady on the plane was trying to figure out my algorithm, like, it's like we make something from nothing every day,
Yes.
and I don't think you can get taught that.
No, I mean, I think what's really interesting, going back to, when you were at that magnet charter school for the
Yeah.
arts, is something that really stuck out to me is you mentioned how motivated everybody was. And I find that it's not about where you go as much as who you're surrounded by. So if you're surrounded by a lot of people that have fire in their gut and their chest and they're trying to do it like that,
Mhm.
that's going to
Mhm.
push you more than anything. You never want to be the most successful, the most talented person in the room, because where do you go from there? Like you want to get pushed to move forward,
And I remember being in school with, there was always that kid, the kid that always won the art fair, the kid that was always had his stuff hung up in the hallway. That kid, I don't know what that kid's doing now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something to be said about that motivation factor and, just kind of doing it when nobody's looking.
Yes.
All those things kind of add up over time.
And the hard truth of the matter is, for my wife, is like, I will not retire from making books. Like this is, I mean, I'll eventually retire from traveling and doing book touring, but this is something I did before it was my job, right? Like, and you were doing it on the front step of your mom's place.
Yeah, right. And
So what was that? Okay, what was that conversation like when you came home and you're like, I'm not going back to college, Mom? What was that conversation like?
Oh, okay. So we didn't really talk about this. Okay, so the money part was real. Just again, like there are some definite dark spots in my timeline, and like money was always kind of one of those things where it's just I didn't go into school with a plan, right? And also just the way things were set up. I had a full-time job while I was still trying to graduate high school.
What were you doing?
I was like working at a university, like I was like a desk receptionist. Like when you go into the dorms and there's somebody sitting there making sure you're not stealing beer,
Yeah.
or bringing beer in a
Yeah.
hockey bag into the dorms. That was me. And like I was 17, 18, and I had this job, and I wound up getting like benefits. And I had a full time. I was working 40 hours a week and going to school and trying to figure that out. And I was helping like at home. Like I split the rent with my mother. So like I was kind of like an adult already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So when I kind of got into the college thing, I'm just like, well, how am I going to figure this out? So I was going to school full time. and also going to work full time, and I burned out really quickly.
Dude, the word of the day is burnout on that for sure.
I burned out hardcore. Like, I don't want to say I was in the hospital, but there was a point where I was at a doctor under a doctor's care, and they were like, "Wait, what are you doing? Yeah, you
Yeah.
can't do that."
No.
Because I was working overnights at the college, so I worked in like the freshman dorm on Thursdays to Sunday morning. This was was a madhouse in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And, my job was kind of just to stay awake, Jared. That's kind of what I did, is just to keep an eye on all these kids who were trying to climb the wall and get over with you. It was like
Yeah.
tower defense.
Yeah.
That was my job, right? Just keeping these kids from like scaling the castle wall. And I would go to work at 11 p.m. and get off at 7 a.m. and then somehow take a shower in the dorm bathroom and get on a train and go to class
That is
for
not sustainable.
8:30 class. And it was one of those things where nobody was like, Jamar, you can't keep this up. Like, there's nobody, and I just kind of at some point hit the wall. And also, I'm excited about being in this place with all these new creatives. There's lots of good looking girls who are dancers that I go to school with. Wow, this is amazing. I want to hang out. On my days off, I'd go downtown and hang out with my friends instead of going to sleep.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
And I was quickly driving towards a wall.
You were young and thought you were indestructible.
And I just burned out. It was fun while it lasted because I had money. I didn't have enough money to pay my tuition. I had enough money to buy my friends cheesesteaks and fries on Friday at the hangout spot. And it just kind of, I just ran out of road.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I kind of ran. This is something funny, and I shouldn't say this on camera, but there was one point where I was in the bursar's office again, and this was kind of like, again, it was a little draconian. I don't think higher education works this way anymore, but they were locking kids out of their dorm rooms if they had standing bills in the bursar's office.
Wow.
Like, we were kind of hanging out with my buddy's room. Like, yo, man, we're going to fire up the Sega Genesis, and there's a padlock on his door and an orange sticker on the door saying, "Come to the bursar's office." They locked him out of his room.
That's so degrading.
And he went down there and was like, yeah, my mom sent the check. Well, until it clears, I don't know where you're going to sleep.
Awful.
I don't think they operate like that
No.
anymore.
They'd be afraid of the social media posts.
No, yeah, right. Like, they'd shut that place down. But I remember being at the bursar's window and this woman saying, "Well, get your mother to write you a check." And I was like, my mother doesn't have any money.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Like, it was so flippant.
Yeah.
Well, get your mother to write you a check. So, reality started coming together, and I was just like, I don't think I can afford to be here. So I just kind of like fell out the back of the school. It wasn't like I was on academic probation or something. I couldn't afford it, and I didn't go back. But this is interesting. Later on, after being the security desk receptionist for like 7 or 8 years, because I still had a full-time job, Jared. Now I wind up being the supervisor of those people. And then I wind up graduating to being like a office monkey. And so now I'm like 23 years old with a shirt and tie on and being the boss of these people in the dorms, like the other dorm receptionists. And these are grown-ups. They're like 40-year-old people who have like babies and like, debt and stuff like that, who did not like me being the boss. They're kind of like, I have kids older than you. You can't tell me what to do. And where's my check? And fight me. I'll see you on Tuesday if my check ain't right. I'm like, I don't want to fight you. It was crazy. So like, I'm in this whole other world. And the whole time, the reason I'm telling you this is when I dropped out of college and I still wanted to be a cartoonist, I'm still trying to do this stuff. I had a lot of resistance from the people in my life who were like, well, now what? Well, I'm still trying to be a cartoonist. You need to go back to school, or like, what's any of this about? Like, I was close to bum status with people in my life. I'm like, I didn't change. The vision hasn't changed. But I talk a lot about resistance and how, like, if Jared, I don't know. I'm going to kind of switch this up for a second. I'm really interested in thinking about people who had cheerleaders in their life versus people who said, you can't do this.
Yeah.
You should give up. The people who I've known who had like, you can do it, honey, you're amazing, usually brown out at some point.
Yeah.
And the people kind of have that kind of really weird volatile resistance somehow make it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think there's a part where you want to prove those people wrong, right? Like that's throwing coal in your furnace to keep you going.
Yeah. So like, I'm all about like supporting people and like, yeah, man, just get over the wall. But I don't know if too much of that is bad.
Oh, and when I was in high school, my grandmother just trashed a painting I had made, and I was 16, and I said, "But Grandma, this is my dream," and she said, "Yeah, that's what it is, a dream." Icy blue eyes piercing through me. So, a good missive for young people who don't have supportive people, who probably think you need supportive people in your life to make it. The only person that's going to help you make it is you, right?
That's real.
You have to create your own opportunities. You have to hone your craft. No one's going to come knocking on your door because you're talented.
No, you got to make your own gravy. That's real.
So what was the first, you have to make your own gravy. What was the first instance of you being able to say to those people, see, it's happening?
You know what? I think about that once in a while, and I don't have like a moment where like I hold up a cash check and go, look, you guys, I did it. It was more subtle. It was more kind of like, well, look, I'm in a newspaper, or look, here's my book on the shelf at Barnes and Noble. I think for the longest time, and you don't really know what people think of you, but I think us types, Jarrett, kind of get like mislabeled as, oh, you're just like this flaky dreamer guy who likes colorful shirts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all you're good for. But then when someone else tells them that you have worth, then all of a sudden it makes them think about it.
Yes.
I could like scream to them blue in the face and look at me, notice me, senpai, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But now there's an article on me in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they go,
it's in the local paper. It's same exact story here.
It's in the paper.
It's in the paper, and wow, it's real.
That's right. So this is great. One of my girl cousins who's younger than me, I don't really hear from them a lot. We have different worlds. But I was in a newspaper. I think it was my first graphic novel that came out, and it kind of made some noise. And there's my author photo for this thing was very kind of like serious.
Oh, I think I know that one.
It's in the
majestic.
paper.
It's a majestic.
It's very that's what she said. Like on my phone. Yeah, my phone rings and my cousin Tammy's on the phone. I was like, oh, hey Tammy, what's up? She was like, damn, you in the paper looking all majestic. And then she laughed and hung up the phone. And I was like, that meant so much to me.
That's amazing.
You looking all majestic. So, but yeah, it's kind of like when it comes from the outside, all of a sudden they start paying attention. And even to that, not so much now because like my family's starting to wither away. Still, a lot of them still kind of like don't understand the modes that we work in. Oh, well, Jamar got a good job at Scholastic. You know what I mean? Like I go in and
you go in and punch in and
and I work in the mailroom or something like that. I was like, no, this isn't what
it's contract work. Yeah, they don't understand how Advance Against Royalties works.
They don't get that. So I just let them be. They just know that I'm very busy.
Yeah.
And, I was like, oh, well, oh, Jamar, did you fly any place new? Where'd you go? You went to Japan. Like they get that.
Yeah.
But I still think they just don't really understand what we do. And I wear this hat all the time. They don't get it.
Yeah.
He was making comic books.
He was like, or self-publishing that he was putting them out, right? Like, is that
yeah. And, that balance again that I kind of saw when he was a kid in my class seemed more on, I have this compulsion to tell these stories. I think he could have used a little bit more maturity and, kind of like the other part of the sausage. You know what I mean? It's like, it's great that you're doing it, but so hold on. So here's another part of this, like kind of being in this new world, doing traditional book publishing and stuff. And even like having a team, like we don't have to talk too much about that, but like you have people who like orbit around you now, Jarrett, as a media personality and a professional author, like agents, publicists, you have all of these people. And I remember talking to somebody who's, just kind of like a person in my life. who was very like angry about things, not in a negative way, but he was like, okay, so how does this work? Trying to break it down for him. I was like, oh, so this person is involved with this, and then they take a percentage, or no, the editors. So then the editors come in and they, like, well, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe this character should be merged into one character rather than two. How are they going to tell you how to tell your story? It's your story. I'm like, yo, relax. I think that's something we don't talk about enough is the collaborative part of making these books.
Yes.
Because it's very rare that you just turn in this shiny brick.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
What I say to people is, the editor is not the boss of me, but the editor is there to get the best possible story out of me. And if there's something that I don't agree with in the editorial notes, I can't just say, I don't like it, because that's not what it is. I have to give a reasoned, reason for it, like a very thoughtful reason, because ultimately they're trying to have the best story put out there. And were you self-publishing for a bit too?
Yeah. And that's my story.
So much respect for people who self-publish, because it's a lot of work. I mean, so before you got your contract with Scholastic, were you just keeping copies in your trunk at every hour?
Yeah.
Every tabling, whoever would have you.
Yeah. So the other part of my iceberg is that I started in comics self-publishing in 1997.
Full on copy machine at Kinko's.
No, well, that was before 97.
Okay.
So hold on. So here's another interesting part, Jarrett. So remember I told you about working at all those colleges? I was also doing comic strips in the school paper.
For the schools you worked at?
So the school I worked at.
That's cool. That's cool that they let you, as not, it's a student
paper.
Yeah,
they were like, wait, what? I was like, yeah, so what, at one point they gave me a full page every month.
That's
I think
huge.
I can't remember I think it was every week or every 2 weeks, whatever. So my Sunday night shift, 11 to 7, I would show up and I'd bring like a pad of Strathmore Bristol, and I would go from 0 to 60. I would have a whole strip lettered and finished by my 7 o'clock clock out. And then I'd walk it across campus and slide it under the office door. And I had to finish.
Dude, that was your art college right there. That was your degree.
Right?
That was your degree. I knew there was a missing link in here somewhere. That's it. And,
I'm not going to tell like Scott from, the collegian that I didn't do it. Like that, it doesn't work that way.
And did you get that job because someone came knocking on your door begging for you?
I just walked over there.
Exactly. See, like you made your own.
I made your own
moment.
I made my own gravy. I walked over there. I was like, "Yo, you guys want a comic strip?" And they're like, "Okay."
What was it called?
All right. So I had 3 iterations. I was doing this for a while, and I was really like honing my craft. So the first one was called The Adventures of Jamar and Patrick, or Patrick and Jamar, whatever.
Oh, it was called whatever.
Yeah, that was the whole title. It like fit on 3 lines over the strip.
I love it.
It was me and this RA kid that I was friends with named Patrick, who, sit up in the booth with me all night, and we would like hash out stories for this strip. So it was kind of the beginning of me thinking about self-publishing. It was me. I always drew myself and my buddy Patrick, who kind of looked like a backup guy from Stone Temple Pilots. You know what I mean? He was very... And, we had these adventures jumping through dimensional portals, and it was just goofy shit. And we just kind of made it happen. And then when he graduated, I was just like, now what am I going to do? So I did a soap opera strip called Low Rent. And this is great. This just kind of came up in my Leon thing. So Low Rent was about these roommates who were on a reality show like Real World. And the production company went out of business and they signed some really bad lease. So they were stuck in the apartment.
Where they were filming.
Yeah, where they were filming, and they had to get jobs and pay for this apartment. And they couldn't break their lease. But inside the strip, there was always somebody in the back with a camera or a boom mic kind of hanging into the panel. And they're always like talking and like looking up at somebody filming them. So this is like really early and when like Real World was new.
Yeah.
Reality TV was new. And it seemed so weird and invasive. That's when the Osbournes came out later.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I wanted ever done this before.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, I just tried to do a strip by myself and it just fell apart and I moved on. But that was like my impetus to start self-publishing. Yeah.
Deadlines. And so you were self-publishing floppy copies, graphic novels.
Floppies, yeah.
And so where would you sell them?
That's a good question. So I learned quickly about the comic book industry from the outside in, where I learned enough, and this is still before Google. Like this is really early internet, like
Yeah, yeah,
AOL and Prodigy.
yeah.
The web hadn't started really, and I had learned enough about publishing and business that I found a printer who could print a floppy comic book, was still kind of unheard of back in the late
Yeah.
90s, early mid 90s, where like if you were lucky enough to have a Kinko's in your area where the dude was savvy enough to know how to print a zine,
Yeah.
they do it. But most places you go into, they're like, we don't. What? I don't
Don't
know how to
even know
make
what
a
a zine
comic
is.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't even what So I found a guy in Texas who knew how to do it. It's like, oh, because they had the big drum rolling
Yeah,
machines that print circulars, that they put in your mailbox. It's like, oh, that's like a series. Yeah, I could do that. So I mailed him my original art boards, like my 11 by 17 art boards, and he shot them. He statted them. There's color separations, the whole thing, the
Wow.
acetate CMYK plates. It was super.
And that was your master's degree in comics.
Yeah, that was like 97 and 98. It finally came out, and that took me a year to do 16 pages. So I was
Yeah.
just figuring it out.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing. I got 2,000 copies of this comic sent to my apartment, and my girlfriend was like, "What are these boxes? What is going on?" I'm like, "I made a comic." Now I had to figure out how to get
sell them.
sell.
There's no social media.
So I figured out how distribution works. I had a lot of consignment at comic book stores across the country. There's a lot of mailers, a lot of mailing, a lot of just not getting paid and just losing. There's a lot of losing money.
A lot of losing money. That's why I have so much respect for people who self-publish, because when you're traditionally published, you're investing your time, but not necessarily your money. Yeah. Unless you're paying for your own travel.
Yeah.
So and this is all well before graphic novels for kids were a thing, of course.
Yeah.
4 or 5 is when Scholastic Graphics and First Second came about.
Mm-hmm.
So you're wearing down the soles of your shoes, going to whatever you can to hand sell these.
Yeah.
Before the children's market was even ready for you, but then now here you are.
Yeah, there's a quick fast forward. Yeah, so probably the biggest time jump for all of this was I had self-published the first Leon book. It was called Protector of the Playground. Yeah, so that's, if you've ever seen it or you see it online, it's an orange cover. And I self-published that. And the world had changed immensely. Like, there was no Ingram Spark print on demand Amazon affiliate thing in 97. And if there was, I would probably still be self-publishing and have a whole different schism. But that kind of put me on Amazon in a different way, because I had some other titles on there, but I was like an illustrator or I adapted somebody's graphic novel. But now here I am and I'm selling stuff, and just from the networking and being around so long, it kind of caught one. I started doing my same comic book conventions that I always did, but now I have this thing that would sell out before the convention was over.
Amazing.
Like constantly. Like I remember I went to New York Comic Con. I sold out. I brought like, I don't remember how many cases, but they're a lot. They're heavy books. Yeah. It was like, and I was just out. It was Saturday afternoon, and I was just like, I was a little dumbstruck, right? Like a buddy came by. I was like, where are your books? I'm like, they're gone. And they were like, yo, that's great. I'm like, but now what am I going to do? I never had that problem before. This is what I like to call good problem.
Yeah, it's a good problem.
And like just from that area, because also kind of what was happening, this was like 2017. We had just gone through this cycle, besides the MCU stuff, which is its own thing. We had gone through this violent cycle of superhero movies. Remember Hancock?
Yeah.
And Kick-Ass.
Yeah.
And
super dark.
Yeah, 300 Sin City, all that kind of stuff. Somebody said to me very wisely back then, it's like, there's going to be a point where the pendulum's going to swing back.
Pendulum always swings back.
And people are going to want like good, wholesome things. And Leon just happened to be riding the pendulum when that started to happen, and it all kind of lined up. So that from there, the Scholastic thing happened a little later, but
How did Leon get to
because of this one graphic novel project I adapted before that called Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun. I had a really bad publishing deal. Like I was unagented. And one of my famous stories is, and I'll make it fast, is that the people were nice. I had a take it or leave it deal. This is my first kind of like traditional publishing thing. They happened to get my name because people in the comics industry kind of chatted me up. It was like one of those like, dragnet type of things. Anybody know a guy who could do a da da da? And people were like, oh, you should talk to Jamar. So they kind of offered me this deal. It was a garbage advance. The whole thing wasn't, it wasn't structured well, but it was a take it or leave it. I was like, well, I'm going to take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
And I did this thing, and there were a lot of kind of like, I hit all my deadlines. I hit all my marks. At the very end of it, my editor called me. Like I turned in my manuscript that was done. And she goes, I want to tell you I really enjoyed working with you. You're a lovely person, but I have a piece of advice for you. Get an agent.
She's like, because I just took advantage of you pretty hardcore.
She said, get an agent. And because of what they did to you, she never told me what they did. I kind of knew.
Yeah.
But she said, I am quitting the business and I'm going into book law.
Whoa.
Have a great career. And she hung up the phone. I've never heard from her since.
What a gift she handed you, though.
What a gift. So, I...
and that's why we pay 15% to our agents, because
I got an agent. I got an agent. And, by that point, some of these people had heard of me. You know what I mean? Because I've been bubbling and doing my own stuff for so long.
Oh, and that's how I first heard of you, too. Like, people were talking you up to me as well.
Wow, Jarrett.
I'd see you pop up on Twitter every now and then, too, and stuff. But
that's so wild, man.
Yeah.
And they, I think my agent tried to pitch Protector of the Playground, even though it was already like in progress. And this is one of the first things I learned about this business is that they don't want your finished thing.
No, they want to be able to help you grow it. They shape it. They want to be Patrick Swayze behind you on the pottery wheel. That's
right. That's something I say to people all the time that gets people really flummoxed when I say, but no, they don't want your finished thing, especially with my comic book buddies.
Yeah.
Because you spent your career turning things in and making the thing. And like, they're fantastic at making a thing. But then when they say, okay, I have this thing, here it is. And I go, they don't want that.
No. They want to be able to grow it. They want to guide you. They don't want to tell you what to do, but they want to guide you.
They don't want your finished thing. So there was kind of like the horse is out of the barn already. Well, let me see what he has next. You know what I mean? So I kind of took a year. This is interesting. It took a year, Jarrett, to get out of my own way. This is something I'd say to some of my buddies who are considering going into kid lit, because there's a lot of misconceptions about being in this world, especially from my comic book buddies who think it's easy.
Yeah.
They think it's a cash out. And they think it, right?
Yeah.
You were like,
oh, cash out.
Right. It's kind of like, oh, well, I draw Green Lantern. How hard is it to draw a kid's book?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a lot of conceit in there because these people are master draftsmen. There's a lot of things going on that aren't exactly what you think they are. So after that, I said, well, it took me a year to deconstruct my comic book brain and prepare myself for traditional publishing, because I had a lot of ego. I had they can't tell me what to do, or how can they say I'm wrong? I've been doing this for 25 years. All of those things. You're smiling.
I'm smiling because they would just be like, all right, have a good one. Yeah. They don't want to deal with that baloney.
No, it's right. So I would tell people who would ask, I was like, you have to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
And kind of like we were talking about, open yourself for collaboration. And it's not you giving something up. It's just learning a different way to work. So after that, I kind of had like a Jerry Maguire moment where I just like woke up in the middle of the night and I just started putting the sketch the thing together.
Well, I'm glad you stepped away from being Cuba Gooding Jr. and show me
about it. And, so like I put together these 50 pages, and there were a lot of people that thought I just like repackaged the thing I did already. Like, no, this is new stuff. Like, why would I do? No, this is new. But my agent, gave me some really good advice, polished it up, put a pitch together, sent it out into the world, and a lot of good stuff started coming back. And one of the funny things that I had heard is like a lot of people knew who I was already, which surprised me Because I'm like, these people have no idea. Like,
You're also living in your own head. We all live in our own heads of,
yeah, you don't know.
I ain't nothing.
Right. So they're like, okay, Scholastic wants to have a conversation. Okay, let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
And there was a point where there was like maybe 4 or 5 publishers that were interested in Leon, and we had like a offer auction. There was some bidding going on, which was very exciting and thrilling. And then, kind of when the dust settled, I chose Scholastic. So that's kind of how Leon Extraordinary happened.
Smart choice,
Yeah.
because then they had a big party for you at San Diego Comic-Con with Leon
Frank,
projected on the wall and little desserts with Leon on top, handing out green Leon sunglasses.
Not bad.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's been a thrill ever since. The work is intense, and it's also unlocked a lot of amazing new friends that I have, like you, and just kind of because it's almost like we kind of speak a language that a lot of people don't know. You know what I mean? And it's not to say it's like insular, but it's like, oh, you understand.
Well, it's insular. We don't have a water cooler that we meet
Right.
with other people on break, and we're so lucky to be doing what we're doing. Yet, life is gonna life, and so there's gonna be things that are really difficult to deal with. But we'd sound like just whiny if we were tweeting that. Like, it's why you have your friends to talk about what you can talk about without judgment of being bummed or frustrated about things.
Right. What is it? The fingernail painting emoji?
Yeah, we keep sending each other the fingernail. Because sometimes I do see tweets. I see tweets from people, from artists and authors, and all I can think of is, you don't have a group text you could have sent that to?
I quit my day job like 3, 4, 5 years ago or something like that. And people were like, oh, ho, ho. I'm like, no, ho, ho, ho. I work harder than I did when I had a day job and was trying to do this stuff on a weekend.
There's so much uncertainty when you are a full-time independent author artist, to the point where even my therapist said, I don't know how you live like that, when I explain how money flows.
Yeah, they're like, wait, what? But yeah, there's a lot of
hustle. There's a lot of, you're not exactly sure where the next paycheck is coming or what it's going to be. If you're lucky enough to get visits to schools and libraries, you can see that on the calendar and hope they pay you on time. And of course, no taxes are ever taken out. So you better hope you had arithmetic back in high school so that you can know what you're supposed to send.
Apostrophe arithmetic.
Never do. So then but we do it because we love it. And obviously it's a lifelong passion. And listeners, that's how Jamar Nicholas became an overnight success. I have a t-shirt upstairs. This is overnight success when I wear it while I'm taking the trash out. Yeah. Well, you are such a joy to talk to, and I'm so grateful for our friendship. And
thank you, Jarrett.
It's been inspiring. It's been inspiring to watch your journey, from a bit of a distance and then be welcomed into the inner circle of the Jamar Nicholas world to see what you're up to.
Thank you.
The Leon books are fantastic. And as we talked about before we started recording, you're hard at work on the 3rd volume. Mm-hmm. Is there a title you can share?
No.
Nope. Okay.
No, I'll just say that he's going to have a really big adventure.
Fantastic. That's a good elevator pitch.
You like that?
That's a good elevator pitch.
I'll leave it at that.
Man.
But yeah, I'm really excited.
Well, Jamar, thank you for sharing your story with us. That was so inspiring. It's got me wanting to get to my sketchbook and just sit outside in the front. The amount of hurdles you had to jump through to get to where you are, you don't see that when you look at that shiny cover with your name on it, printed up at Barnes & Noble. So thank you for sharing that story with us, my friend.
Thank you, JJK. I had a great time, and let's never let this end.
Let's never let this end.
Never let
Friends
it go.
Forever.